The morning sun peeped through the cafe's front windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floor. At exactly 5:30 a.m., like clockwork, May unlocked the heavy glass door of Crystal Bean Café. Her fingers lingered for a moment on the brass handle, still cool from the night air. The quiet before opening time was always her favorite part of the day. These precious minutes belonged just to her and her thoughts. Inside, the cafe held its own kind of music. The gentle hum of refrigerators, the clicking of lights warming up, and soon, the familiar whir of coffee grinders would create the daily symphony she had grown to know by heart. But today, something felt different. As she walked past the wall of vintage instruments, her father's proud collection, a violin caught the morning light, making her pause mid-step. 10 years ago, that same violin had been in her hands on the gleaming stage of the National Music Academy. Now it hung silent, gathering dust alongside other remnants of what could have been. May shook her head, pushing away the memory. The coffee beans wouldn't grind themselves, and the morning rush waited for no one's daydreams. "Morning, boss." Rad's cheerful voice broke through her thoughts as he pushed through the back door, his apron already tied and a stack of delivery papers in hand. The milk supplier called. "They're running 15 minutes late." Again, Mai sighed, but couldn't help smiling at her assistant manager's perpetual optimism. "Okay, let's start with the pastry display then." Did Uncle Wong drop off the fresh batches? The next hour flew by in a blur of activity. Mi's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking inventory, arranging displays, testing the espresso machines. Each task had its own rhythm, like a well-rehearsed piece. The morning sun climbed higher, and with it came the first wave of customers. "One caramel macchiato, extra shot, light foam," she called out, her fingers dancing across the espresso machine's controls. In quiet moments between orders, they would tap out phantom melodies on the counter. Chopin's nocturnes, Bach's preludes, muscle memory that refused to fade despite years away from the keys. The walls of Crystal Bean told their own story. Between the instruments hung faded photos. Her parents on opening day 25 years ago, their proud smiles and tired eyes speaking of countless sacrifices. When her father's health had begun to fail 3 years ago, there had been no question of what Mai would do. The acceptance letter to the prestigious music program had been quietly folded away, replaced by spreadsheets and supplier contracts. By mid-morning, the cafe hummed with life. Regular customers typed away on laptops, students huddled over textbooks, and business people rushed in for their second cup of the day. Mai moved between tables, refilling cups and exchanging warm greetings. Many faces she had known for years. They were more than customers now. They were part of the cafe's extended family. "The usual, Mrs. Liu?" she asked the elderly lady who came every Thursday, always sitting at the corner table with her crossword puzzle. "You know me too well, dear." Mrs. Liu smiled, her eyes crinkling behind her glasses. "Though I do miss hearing you play at the community center. Such talent shouldn't stay hidden forever." Mia gave a polite nod, the familiar weight of unspoken words settling in her chest. The old upright piano in the storage room flashed through her mind. She had spent countless late nights there after closing, playing softly so no one would hear, keeping her fingers nimble even as her dreams gathered dust alongside the violin on the wall. A crash from the kitchen snapped her back to reality. "I'll check on that," she called out, already moving toward the sound. This was her world now. Not concert halls and standing ovations, but the steady rhythm of serving others, of keeping her parents' dream alive. Some days it felt like enough. Some days, like today, the music in her head played a little louder, a little more insistently, reminding her of paths not taken. But there were orders to fill, supplies to check, and a staff meeting to plan. Mai straightened her apron and pushed through the kitchen doors, ready to face whatever challenge came next. After all, she thought, every life has its own melody, even if it's not the one you originally planned to play. The afternoon rain drummed steadily against the cafe windows, creating a soothing backdrop to the usual coffee shop bustle. Mai wiped down the counter for the 100th time that day, her movements automatic after years of practice. The cafe had settled into its post-lunch lull, with only a handful of customers seeking shelter from the weather. The bell above the door chimed softly, and Mai looked up to see an elderly gentleman shaking raindrops from his umbrella. There was something different about him. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself, or the well-worn leather briefcase that spoke of years of use. His eyes scanned the cafe walls, lingering on each instrument with clear interest. "Welcome to Crystal Bean," Mai said warmly. "What can I get for you today?" The man approached the counter, his gaze settling on her hands. "A simple green tea, if you please," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent. "I couldn't help but notice. Your fingers were tapping out Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor just now." Mai froze mid-motion, suddenly aware of her unconscious habit. It had been years since anyone had recognized the phantom melodies her fingers played. "You know classical music?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual as she prepared his tea. "I should hope so," he chuckled. "I'm Professor Chen. I teach at the City Conservatory of Music." He paused, watching as she precisely measured the tea leaves. "Those aren't the hands of someone who just listens to classical music. You've played seriously, haven't you?" Something in his gentle tone made Mai look up. Their eyes met, and she saw no judgment there, only genuine curiosity. "I did," she admitted, sliding his tea across the counter. "A lifetime ago, it seems." "The way you move suggests otherwise," Professor Chen observed, taking a sip of his tea. "Perfect temperature," he added with approval. "You know, I've never seen a cafe with such an impressive collection of instruments. That violin on the wall, is that a genuine Yamaha?" For the next few minutes, as the rain continued its steady pattern outside, Mai found herself drawn into a conversation about music that felt like speaking a language she'd almost forgotten. Professor Chen knew his instruments, and his eyes lit up when she mentioned her years at the National Music Academy. "You studied under Master Guang?" he exclaimed, leaning forward with interest. "He's a dear friend. Why did you stop?" The question wasn't accusatory, but Mai still felt the familiar twist in her stomach. She glanced at the photo of her parents on the wall, their proud smiles watching over the cafe. "Family needed me," she said simply. "The cafe. It's been in our family for 25 years." Professor Chen nodded thoughtfully, his eyes taking in the carefully maintained space, the happy customers, the warmth that seemed to radiate from every corner. "You've created something beautiful here," he said. "But you know, music has a way of finding its way back to those who truly love it." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small card. "I teach evening master classes at the conservatory. Nothing formal. Just a group of passionate musicians sharing their love of music. We meet twice a week." He slid the card across the counter. "You'd be welcome to sit in, whenever the cafe can spare you." Mai picked up the card, its simple text seeming to pulse with possibility. I'm not sure I can," she began, but Professor Chen was already standing up. "No pressure," he smiled, gathering his umbrella. "But music isn't just about concert halls and competitions. Sometimes it's about finding your own melody in unexpected places." He gestured around the cafe. "You've already created a symphony here. Perhaps it's time to add another movement to it." As he turned to leave, the bell chiming his departure, Mai found herself staring at the card in her hands. Behind her, the violin on the wall caught the afternoon light, its shadow dancing slightly with the movement of trees outside the window. "Everything okay, boss?" Raj called from the kitchen, breaking her reverie. "The afternoon delivery is here." "Coming," Mai replied, but she slipped the card into her apron pocket first. The weight of it felt like a secret, a key to a door she thought had long since closed. The rain continued its gentle rhythm outside, but now it seemed to be playing a different tune, one that whispered of possibilities and second chances. The conservatory halls were quieter than Mai remembered from her student days, but the familiar scent of wood polish and rosin brought back a flood of memories. She had waited until after closing time to visit, telling herself she was just curious. Professor Chen's card had burned a hole in her pocket for 3 days before she finally gathered the courage to come. Through an open practice room door, she heard someone working through a difficult passage of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The pianist kept stopping and starting, each attempt getting closer to perfection. Mi's fingers twitched at her sides, muscle memory suggesting how to navigate those tricky transitions. "Ah, you came." Professor Chen's voice echoed softly down the hallway. He emerged from one of the classrooms, a stack of sheet music under his arm. "I was beginning to wonder if my card had gotten lost in the day's coffee grounds." Mai smiled despite her nervousness. "The cafe keeps me busy," she explained, following as he gestured for her to walk with him. "I'm not sure I should even be here." "Nonsense," he said warmly. "Music belongs to everyone who loves it. Come, listen for a while. No pressure, no expectations." The master class was held in a large room with rows of chairs arranged in a semicircle around a grand piano. Students of all ages were settling in, some clearly professionals, others looking as uncertain as Mai felt. She chose a seat near the back, trying to make herself invisible. A middle-aged woman took her place at the piano, explaining that she was a dental hygienist who had recently returned to playing after 20 years. Her performance wasn't perfect, but there was joy in every note she played. The group's feedback was gentle, constructive, focused on growth rather than criticism. As the evening progressed, Mai found herself leaning forward in her chair, absorbed in the music and discussion. When Professor Chen demonstrated a particular technique, her hands moved unconsciously in her lap, following the familiar patterns. "Would you like to try?" he asked suddenly, catching her movement. Mi's heart jumped to her throat. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." "Just a few bars," he encouraged. "The piano won't bite." Before she could think of another excuse, her feet had carried her to the bench. The keys felt cool and smooth under her fingers, so different from the worn plastic of her storage room upright. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and began to play. The opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the room. She had played this piece thousands of times, but something felt different now. Each phrase carried the weight of years spent away, of dreams carefully packed away. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence before the room erupted in warm applause. Mi's cheeks burned as she hurried back to her seat, but she couldn't deny the electric feeling running through her veins. That night, after everyone had gone home, she found herself in the cafe's storage room. The old upright piano sat in its corner, covered in a thin layer of dust. With trembling hands, she lifted the cover and began to play. The sound wasn't as rich as the conservatory's grand piano, but in the quiet of the empty café, it felt like coming home. She played until her fingers ached, until the morning delivery truck's headlights swept across the windows. The sky was beginning to lighten when she finally closed the piano lid. In a few hours, she would need to open the café, count the inventory, start another day of coffee and conversations. But something had shifted. The music that had lived in her head for so long had found its way out again, and she wasn't sure she could, or wanted to, silence it this time. As she began her morning routine, she caught her reflection in the cafe window. Behind her, the violin on the wall seemed to glow in the pre-dawn light, as if awakening from a long sleep. The day ahead would bring its usual challenges, but now they would have a soundtrack, one that had been waiting patiently for its moment to play again. The morning rush at Crystal Bean was in full swing when the milk delivery truck failed to show up. Mai stared at her phone, rereading the supplier's apologetic message while a line of customers stretched to the door. Her head pounded with a familiar stress headache. She'd been up late again, practicing for the upcoming student showcase. I can run to the market, Raj offered, already untying his apron. We still have enough for the next hour. No, I'll go, Mai said, grabbing her keys. You're better with the espresso machine anyway. She'd barely slept, her fingers still tingling from hours at the piano. The piece Professor Chen had suggested for the showcase was proving more challenging than she'd expected. Her father's voice drifted from his usual corner table, where he sat with his morning newspaper. The coffee beans delivery is coming today, he reminded her. Don't forget to check the inventory like last week. The gentle reproach in his voice made her stomach twist. Last Thursday, she'd been so absorbed in practicing that she'd forgotten to place the order. They'd nearly run out over the weekend. I won't forget, bah, she promised, hurrying out the door. The cool morning air did little to clear her head. At the market, her phone buzzed with a message from Professor Chen. Changed tonight's practice room to 301. Bring the chop-in score we discussed. She was typing her reply when she nearly collided with a display of cereal boxes. Focus, she told herself. Milk first, music later. But her mind kept wandering to the tricky passage in the third movement that she still couldn't quite master. Back at the cafe, she found her mother behind the counter, handling the register with worried efficiency. The beans delivery came early, she said in Mandarin. I had to turn them away. Nobody was here to check the order. What? But they weren't supposed to come until... Mi checked her watch and her heart sank. She'd spent too long at the market, lost in her thoughts. I'll call them right away. Mine May, her mother said softly, using her childhood nickname. Is everything all right? You seem distracted lately. I'm fine, Ma. Just tired. She busied herself with restocking the milk, avoiding her mother's concerned gaze. The afternoon brought more challenges. A large catering order was missing several items she'd forgotten to add to the list. Raj covered for her, but she saw the worried looks he exchanged with other staff members. You got the dates mixed up, he said quietly, showing her the calendar. The neighborhood festival meeting is today, not next week. Mi's heart dropped. She was supposed to be at the conservatory in an hour for practice. I can't believe I forgot, she whispered, pulling out her phone to message Professor Chen. Go, Raj said suddenly. I'll handle the meeting. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. He smiled. Boss, I've seen you come alive these past few weeks. The music, it's part of who you are. Tears pricked at her eyes. The cafe is who I am too. Maybe you can be both. He shrugged. But right now, you're trying so hard to be perfect at everything that you're stretching yourself too thin. The truth of his words hit hard. That evening, her practice session was distracted. She kept making mistakes in passages she perfected days ago, her fingers heavy with guilt and worry. Your mind is elsewhere tonight, Professor Chen observed gently. I'm sorry, Mai sighed. Everything's getting so complicated. Maybe I should just... Stop? He raised an eyebrow. Or find a better way. On her way home, she paused outside the darkened cafe. Through the window, she could see the violin on the wall, the photos of her parents, the space they'd built with years of dedication. The street lights cast double shadows, one reaching toward the cafe door, the other pointing down the street toward the conservatory. Her phone buzzed again. Tomorrow's supplier list needed reviewing, and she still hadn't prepared for the weekend rush. But her fingers itched to practice, to lose herself in the music that had reawakened something essential in her soul. Standing there in the quiet street, May realized something had to give. She just wasn't sure what, or how, to choose. The sound of breaking porcelain echoed through the cafe like a wrong note in a familiar song. Mai rushed from the storage room to find her younger sister, Lynn, standing amidst the remains of a coffee cup, her face flushed with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, Lynn stammered, already reaching for the broom. I was trying to help with the morning setup, but everything's in different places than I remembered from high school. Me knelt to help clean up, noticing how Lynn's hands trembled slightly. Her sister had just returned from university for an extended break, claiming she needed time to figure things out. Their parents hadn't been thrilled, but they'd welcomed her home. It's fine, Maya assured her. Actually, would you like to learn? Properly, I mean, the whole system. Lynn looked up, surprise crossing her face. You trust me with that? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lynn had always been the free spirit, the one who'd gone away to study art history while Mai stayed to run the cafe. But now, watching her sister's careful movements as she swept up the broken cup, Mai saw something different, something familiar. Remember when we were kids? Mai asked, straightening the counter displays. You used to play restaurant with your stuffed animals. You had a whole menu written out. Lynn laughed. And you used to make me real tea in tiny cups, but only if I followed your exact instructions about serving it properly. As the morning progressed, Mai found herself watching her sister more closely. Lynn had a natural way with customers, remembering their names and orders just like their mother always had. She organized the pastry display with an artist's eye, making everything look more appealing. During the afternoon lull, Mai took a deep breath and pulled out the cafe's accounting books. Want to learn something really exciting? She asked, only half joking. The fascinating world of inventory management. To her surprise, Lynn pulled up a chair with genuine interest. Show me. I've been taking some business classes online, actually, ever since I realized art history might not be. Your Melody, Mai suggested softly. Lynn looked up sharply. That's it exactly. Everyone expected me to be the artistic one, just like everyone expected you to be the responsible one. But maybe we're both a little of each. That evening, after the cafe closed, Mai found herself explaining their supplier relationships to Lynn, who took detailed notes and even suggested some improvements to their ordering system. The cafe's old piano provided quiet background music. Mai had finally moved it out of storage, and now it sat in a corner of the main room. You know, Lynn said thoughtfully, we could do something with that space near the window. Maybe some small tables, make it feel like a proper performance area. Mai's fingers paused on the keys. What do you mean? Well, you're not the only musical person in the neighborhood. I've heard at least 3 customers mention missing live music since the old jazz club closed. And with your connections at the conservatory, the idea took root, growing stronger as they discussed possibilities. Lynn sketched rough layouts in her notebook while Mai made calls to her musician friends. The cafe's walls, lined with their father's instrument collection, seemed to hum with possibility. When their parents arrived for their usual evening check-in, they found their daughters surrounded by papers covered in plans and numbers. What's all this? Their father asked, picking up one of Lynn's sketches. Together, they explained their vision. Evening music events, a new layout that would accommodate both cafe and performances, a schedule that would let them share management duties. As they talked, their mother's worried frown gradually softened into a smile. 2 daughters, she said finally, in Mandarin, each finding her own way to carry on the family legacy. But together. She touched the piano gently. Music and coffee, why not? They both bring people together. Their father studied the business projections Lynn had prepared. These numbers, they're good. You've thought this through. We both have skills to offer, Mai said carefully. Different ones, but they complement each other, like harmony and melody. Later that night, as they closed up together for the first time, Lynn paused by the piano. Play something, she asked. Like when we were kids and you'd practice while I did homework. Mai sat down at the keys, and the cafe filled with gentle music. Through the window, she could see their new coming soon. Live music nights, sign catching the streetlight. It wasn't the future she'd imagined, but somehow it felt right. A new arrangement of a beloved song, with unexpected notes making it richer than before. The conservatory's concert hall buzzed with nervous energy. Backstage, May adjusted her black dress for the 100th time, her hands shaking slightly as she smoothed invisible wrinkles. Through the curtain, she could hear the murmur of the gathering audience, punctuated by occasional laughter and the rustle of programs. 5 minutes. Professor Chen called softly, poking his head into the waiting area. His eyes crinkled with warmth when he saw her. Nervous? Terrified, Mai admitted, managing a weak smile. I haven't performed in front of an audience since you were 18, he finished. But you're not that same person anymore. You've lived more, felt more. That's what makes music meaningful. In the audience, she knew her family was settling into their seats. Lynn had closed the cafe early, hanging a handwritten sign. Closed for family concert. Back tomorrow with live music nights. Their parents had arrived dressed in their finest clothes, their father leaning slightly on his cane, but insisting on coming despite his recent health struggles. The memory of their conversation last week still made her throat tight. I don't expect you to come, she had told them, sliding the concert invitation across the dinner table. I know it's not what you wanted for me. Not what we wanted. Her father had interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. We wanted you to be happy. We thought the cafe would make you happy because it made us happy. But happiness, it can have many sounds, can't it? Now, listening to the shuffling of feet and quiet conversations beyond the curtain, May closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her fingers moved silently, rehearsing the opening measures of her piece one last time. Next up, she heard the announcer say, performing Claude Debussy's Clair de Lune, Mai Chen. The walk to the piano felt endless and instant all at once. The stage lights were warm on her face as she bowed slightly, then settled onto the bench. The keys gleamed under the spotlights, familiar and strange at the same time. For a moment, she was frozen. Then, in the front row, she caught sight of Lynn giving her a tiny thumbs up. Behind her sister, she saw Raj and some of the cafe regulars who had insisted on coming. Mrs. Liu, their faithful crossword puzzle customer, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue before the music had even begun. May placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes floated out into the silent hall like ripples on still water. This piece, she had played it thousands of times over the years, in stolen moments after closing time, in quiet mornings before the cafe opened. But never like this. Never with all the years of serving others, of watching dreams fade and new ones grow, of finding unexpected harmony in a life she hadn't planned. As she played, she thought of the cafe's walls lined with instruments that would soon ring with music again. She thought of Lynn's excited plans for their new venture, of her parents' gradual understanding, of Professor Chen's quiet guidance that had helped her find her way back to this moment. The music swelled and softened, each phrase carrying the weight of her journey. When she reached the climax of the piece, her fingers moved with a certainty she had never felt before. This wasn't just muscle memory, it was her story, told in moonlight and melody. The final notes hung in the air like stars, fading slowly into silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved or breathed. Then the applause began, rolling through the hall like thunder. When Mai stood to bow, she saw her father wiping tears from his eyes, her mother's hands clasped tightly in pride. Lynn was on her feet, cheering shamelessly. Even Mrs. Liu had abandoned her usual reserve, clapping with unrestrained joy. Backstage after the performance, her family surrounded her with hugs and exclamations. But it was her father's quiet words that she would remember most clearly. Now I understand, he said softly in Mandarin, holding her hands in his. The cafe was our dream, but this, he gestured to the piano, to the hall still buzzing with excitement. This is your harmony. And somehow, together, they make an even more beautiful song. 3 months after the concert, Crystal Bean Cafe hummed with a new kind of energy. The evening sun slanted through the windows, casting warm light on the rearranged space that now included a proper performance area. The old piano, polished and tuned, had found its permanent home near the window, surrounded by small tables with tea lights. Mai stood behind the counter, watching a young girl practice scales while her mother sipped coffee nearby. The after-school music lessons had been Lynn's idea, a way to fill the quiet afternoon hours between lunch rush and evening performances. Now they had 6 regular students, each bringing their own dreams and determination to the café. Hot chocolate for the pianist. Lynn appeared at her side, already preparing the drink with extra whipped cream. She's been working on that piece for 20 minutes straight. Mai smiled, remembering her own childhood determination. Remember to add the cinnamon the way she likes it. The siblings had fallen into an easy rhythm of sharing responsibilities. Lynn managed the morning rush and afternoon lessons, while Mai handled the evening events and advanced students. Somehow, the cafe felt more alive than ever. The bell above the door chimed as Professor Chen entered, carrying his worn leather briefcase. "Ready for tonight's chamber music?" he asked, settling at his usual corner table. Every Thursday, he brought students from the conservatory to perform, turning the cafe into an informal concert hall. "Full house already," Mai replied, bringing him his usual green tea. The neighborhood really missed having live music. She glanced at the wall where her father's instrument collection now served a new purpose. Local musicians could borrow them for performances, breathing life back into the silent strings. The afternoon light faded into evening, and the cafe transformed. Regular customers who once came just for coffee now lingered, nursing their drinks as music filled the space. Tonight's performers were a string quartet, conservatory students playing Mozart with fresh enthusiasm. Between pieces, Mai heard fragments of conversation. A retired teacher discovering a passion for cello, 2 teenagers discussing their first composition attempts, a grandmother bringing her grandson to hear classical music for the first time. The cafe had become more than just a place for coffee. It was a bridge between worlds. Her parents arrived during intermission, as they did every Thursday. Her father settled into his reserved seat, nodding in approval at the full tables. "Business is good," he observed, but his eyes shone with pride that went beyond profit margins. "Better than good," Lynn chimed in, bringing them their usual order, chrysanthemum tea and almond cookies. "We're thinking of adding Sunday afternoon family concerts, kid-friendly programs." As the music resumed, Mee caught sight of Mrs. Liu in her corner, her crossword puzzle forgotten as she swayed gently to the melody. Raj moved efficiently between tables, somehow making his serving duties part of the performance's natural flow. Even the steam from the espresso machine seemed to dance in rhythm with the music. Later that night, after the last customer had left and Lynn had gone home, Mai sat at the piano. The cafe felt different in these quiet moments, not empty, but full of echoes. Her fingers found the keys, and she began to play something new. Not Debussy or Chopin, but a piece she'd been working on herself. It was a simple melody that incorporated all the sounds of her daily life: the morning bustle of coffee grinders, the afternoon quiet of practice sessions, the evening applause of concertgoers. She'd woven in fragments of Chinese folk songs her mother used to hum, rhythms from her father's favorite traditional music, even the cheerful chaos of Lynn's art-inspired innovations. The next morning, as she unlocked the cafe door, the rising sun caught the violin on the wall. It no longer looked like a relic of abandoned dreams, but rather a symbol of how dreams could transform and grow. A delivery truck rumbled past, and she smiled, hearing music even in its engine's rhythm. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lynn. "Don't forget. Interview with the local paper at 2. They want to feature us in their community culture section." Mai slipped the phone back into her pocket and began her morning routine, each movement a note in the day's emerging symphony. The cafe's new sign caught the morning light: Crystal Bean Café, where music and memory meet. Below it, in smaller letters, coffee, concerts, and community. This wasn't the life she'd imagined as a young music student, nor was it the simple cafe owner's life her parents had envisioned. It was something new, an unexpected harmony of both worlds, creating its own unique melody. And every day, she got to help others find their own songs within its walls.